Since the last video did way better than I expected, we're back with more Persona characters with Pokemon teams. Also known as I'm finishing up the Phantom Thieves and throwing in some of the other characters. And just like before, these little icons will show up in the screen to indicate how spoilery it is. Basically, very little to none, mid-game, and basically post-game level spoilers for their respective games. So without further ado, let's finish off the Phantom Thieves. So first up is Catchy, the last Phantom Thief from Vanilla. And honestly, I think he has a pretty solid team. It's actually really good. First up is Decidui, the Archer. His persona's Robin Hood. I'm pretty sure like 50% of people who have used the Decidui named it something along the lines of Robin Hood. Anyway, next up is Inteleon. I can't remember my exact reasoning or notes. This will be a thing since Crow and Kasumi were meant to be in the first video, so the notes are a bit dated, and I don't remember them all, and I have lost several pieces of them. But Inteleon does just generally fit. It's like a special agent, secret agent kind of thing, and, well, Crow's a detective. It works. It's just a case of I've genuinely lost most of my notes for this guy. Next up is Little Murkrow. Easily his worst Pokemon, despite it being one of the best Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet competitive for a little bit. But, come on. His codename's Crow. I'm giving him Murkrow. Next up is Galarian Weezing. And this is one where it looks weird and unconventional, but Robin Hood as a persona uses the elements of light and dark. Galarian Weezing kind of fits into that with its poison fairy typing. Basically, two very opposite types being combined together. I think it fits just with the general typing. I think it's a neat idea, at least. For basically the exact same reasons, we have Grimmsnarl. Again, a very opposite type of elemental Pokemon. Also, this is something I realized while looking at its art while editing this, but nose is long. It has like a very similar nose shape to the beak on a Catchy's mask. And lastly, Hisuian Zorua, to represent Heraldward. His third tier persona is Kasumi. Also, this entire section contains spoilers throughout the entirety of the third semester, including the background image we're using. Her first two Pokemon are Gardevoir and Hisuian Lilligant. I'm covering them together because they both represent two stages of the Cendrillon line of personas. Basically, her first tier and her third tier persona are being represented in these two Pokemon. Simple as that. Next up is Marshadow. Since Sumi lives in her sister's shadow, or at least that's how she thinks of it herself, I decided to give her the Pokemon that is literally named after a shadow. Next up is Zorua. Since she hides under the false identity of her sister. My notes say Linoon, and I don't know why. Just Linoon. Can someone figure this one out for me? Because I genuinely don't know why I gave her a Linoon, but she has a Linoon. Lastly is Drampa, to represent her father. There's not much more than that. I just think it fits, and with her social link having a pretty big role with him, I think it applies quite well. Alright, next section is mega spoilery. Black Mask. Also, this is amazing. This is the best render I could find of him. There is like no good official artwork or a 3D render of his model. That has been ripped online and is available through the Persona Wiki. Anyway, Zorua! Or Zoroark? Zoroark! What better to give the deceptive trickster than the two Pokemon that can transform into other Pokemon by illusions? Yeah, I gave him two, but at that, they represent Loki and Heraldward respectively. Heraldward we established previously, and I'm sure you're wondering, alright, then where is Robin Hood? Simple. Kasumi and Decidueye. You see, we took Decidueye and made it more aggressive and mean looking. Next up is a Low Kicks. Look at it, it just fits the general vibe. It's super fitting in its design. Next up is Darkrai. I can't remember my exact notes, but it's probably for similar reasons as to Low Kicks. I mean, it's basically the nightmare Pokemon for the mass murderer serial killer character. And lastly, his Murkrow evolved into the boss, Honchkrow. Okay, it's a very fitting Pokemon to give this type of character. And I gave him a Murkrow before because his name was Crow. Let it evolve into the evil one. Our penultimate Phantom Thief of the video is Sophia. And why are we still on spoiler territory? Like, I thought we'd be done with it by the Strikers characters. No? First up is Iron Moth to represent her persona, Pythos. Pythos? I don't know how to pronounce it. But I chose it just because the wing design is very similar to the 4 boxes that float around Sophia's back. Next up being Gimmighoul chest form to represent her true persona, Pandora. Pandora's box, chest, don't think I need to explain it. Lovedis to represent her goal of understanding the human heart. Since she resides as a phone application in the real world, I decided to give her Rotom, a Pokemon that's most prominent appearances in the last 5 Pokemon games have been as a cell phone. And lastly, to round her team off, Sylveon. I think it's a Pokemon that just fits her general vibe and personality quite well. The last Phantom Thief of the video, and the last one I have to cover, unless there are more in Tactica, because I'm not ever touching X, is Wolf. First up is Hisuian Arcanine. It has a vibe that I think fits him and the dungeon he's associated with better than normal Arcanine. On top of that, Arcanine are usually associated as the equivalent to police dogs in the Pokemon universe. Zenkichi being a police officer made sense. I decided to give him Drampa since, well, by comparison to the thieves, he's quite old. He's in his 40s, that isn't that old, but again, it's one of those things of comparison, you're over double the age of the oldest thieves. Next up is Urshifu's single strike form to represent his persona Valjean, I don't know how it's pronounced. But they have a similar stature and color palette. There's nothing more to it. I also gave him a Lycanroc Midnight form. I had to give him another wolf Pokemon. Given I consider Arcanine more of a dog, so this is his wolf Pokemon for the guy whose codename is Wolf. Braxton to represent his daughter Akane. And lastly, but certainly not least, Aegislash. He wields giant great swords. I think giving him the sword Pokemon fits. Also because that is the main thing I associate with him, wielding those swords is so cool. Makoto Yuki. Alright, we're finally on to... First up is Exploud. This was the closest thing I could find to Orpheus, but there weren't really good options for his persona. However, it still works with the general music motif I decided to go with for Makoto, since he's basically always wearing headphones. He's very much a music 2002 kind of guy. Meloetta for basically the same reasons. Music just generally fits the motif I kind of associate with him. Noivern! Again, basically same reasons. You could also give this to Orpheus, and I would not be mad. These 3 were very much similar reasons. I was struggling with Makoto, but he's kind of the most generic protagonist out of the 3. Of course, next is Cresselia. Persona 3 has a lot to do with the moon and the cycles of the moon, so I decided to give it a Pokemon that very much represents the moon. Look, it's a crab with a gun arm that is blue. I don't think I need to explain further. I probably do, but I'm not going to because it feels funnier to not elaborate. And lastly, Garganical. The reason there's a spoiler warning on this section. Just like Joker, there's one. Of course there is. But basically, he's here to represent Makoto's sacrifice at the end of the game, with him turning into a statue to seal away Nyx. Nyx? However you pronounce it. Next up is Yunarukami. And finally, we have one where I don't have to put a spoiler warning. Next up is Bisharp, to represent his persona. Is it Izanagi or Izanami? I don't feel like checking, but just generally is the right vibe. On a similar note, there's Zacian, to represent his attack, Myriad Truths. It's a move that gets used once in Persona 4 as part of a cutscene, but if you've played Persona 5 with DLC, you know how important that attack is. Next up is Toxtricity. The electric typing fits, and I wanted to make reference to the scene where the entirety of your party just plays a music with Rise, so I did. I am a shadow, the true self. That's why Mars Shadow's here. The whole shadow thing is so prevalent to Persona 4 specifically that I had to give him Mars Shadow. Rotom being here to represent the TV world and just generally the ability to enter electronics, being similar to Yu's ability to enter the TV. And lastly, Aegislash. Also here for the general Myriad Truths and Swords thing. But in all fairness, Myriad means multiple, so we have 2 multiples and 2 Myriad Truths. And finally for this video, the master of the Velvet Room, Igor. Just like Igor, Probopass's most notable trait is a giant nose. Male Meowstic being here to represent the Velvet Attendants. Meowstic just has that vibe. Annoyingly, I have to go with the male because it has gender differences, despite the vast majority of Velvet Attendants being female, with Theodore being the only male one to my knowledge. Kyurem White to represent Persona Fusion, you know, since the Pokemon that fuses. I could have gone with Necrozma Duskmane or Dawnmane, but I don't know. Kyurem just has the better vibe, and I personally prefer Kyurem White. Next up being Silvally, a Pokemon designed after Arceus, representing Yaldabelth's possession of Igor's body in Persona 5. Yaldabelth being a sort of false god. Vivillon to represent the very strong butterfly motif the Velvet Room happens to have across these games. There's nothing more aside from that. I just figure they're often represented with butterflies, so give them a butterfly. Lastly being Drillbur, a Pokemon I mostly just chose because it has a prominent nose in its design and I was running out of ideas, I'll be honest. Do you have any other ideas? If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like and subscribe since it helps the channel out a ton. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!